No, that was okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us and here in the afternoon. Also, thanks for those who are participating online. Our housekeeping rules haven't changed yet, so please do not activate your phone if you're not talking, and keep it as it is. I think it works very well. Can go to the next slide. Oh, yes. The third session is, again, something very important for us in our vision and our mission as the Infrastructure Reflection Group. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I think we can go over the e-IRG comments because we have already mentioned them in the morning. Thanks again for the program committee and the work they have done. The session 3, which is now the one which is considered with the diverse ecosystems of EOSC nodes. We can then discuss if it is a new idea or if it is a developed idea from old inventions. Next slide, please. Yeah, yes, you can go on, please. Yeah, here we go. And in this context, I want to refer to the view of the EOSC EU node of the procurement of the managed core services for EOSC as a system of federated nodes across Europe. And this has opened an intensive and to a certain extent controversial discussion due to the lack of definition of the node themselves. So maybe we can clarify a few things here in this session or within the discussion of this session. There are multiple stakeholders in this ecosystem, such as the related thematic nodes, for example, the ESFRI research infrastructure national nodes, the ESFRI EU clusters, horizontal nodes, in example, the e-infrastructure, NRENs, the NGIs, national HPC centers, and also EOSC or open science national nodes, or other national initiatives in the connection to the idea of implementing EOSC. In some cases, already encompassing some of the above constituents. So the objective of this session is also fairly clear. We want to discuss the topic of national nodes and understand the view of the community and the highlight of the importance of the research infrastructure nodes with respect to the EOSC node vision, which is currently under discussion. So next slide, please. We are going through various presentations. The first one will be about, in general, the model of EOSC nodes. The second one will be about EOSC ESFRI task force results in connection to the nodes. Third one will be the infrastructure assembly view, which is also quite valuable in the overall discussion because as mentioned before, infrastructures play a very important role here. By the implementation. The presentation which is following then is a view on the thematic infrastructures, like ESFRI clusters, OSCAs, for example, followed by e-IRG national nodes. This will cover the full spectrum of infrastructures. And last but not least, we will then head into a panel discussion for discussing the importance of research infrastructures, respectively e-infrastructures. I do not want to mention this all the time because we get the feeling that we are talking about infrastructures as a whole. Nodes with respect to the EOSC nodes vision. So welcome you again, and we can go to the next slide, please. For the actors, I want to mention our distinguished speakers and guests. It is the European Commission, represented by Dejan Dvořák. It is ESFRI Task Force, with a prominent member of Volker Beckmann, also a colleague in the steering board of EOSC. There is the EOSC Association, represented by Bob Jones. Thanks for coming. The newly, or let's more or less newly assembled e-Infrastructure Assembly, represented by Tiziana Ferrari, Licia Florio, Natalia Magnola, and Jos van Wezel. We have a representation also from the ESFRI clusters in the person of Giovanni Lamanna. We have the national nodes here, ICDI, in the person of Mauro Capagnola, but I think he was he's excused for today and not available. But we'll be informed about our discussions afterwards. We have from the e-IRG national nodes, for recalling them, we have Fotis Katayanis, who is with us anyway, and myself. So next slide, please.
One correction, Dejan is from RNI, not Connect.
I see. Yeah, we have to correct. We just pulled him with another DG, but I think it is the voice from the Commission, I would say, which is who is with us. I think we can skip the what's next point. We're coming to this to an end, and I guess we follow with our first presentation now to try to be in time. And I also want to emphasize you, of course, to be on time with your talks, that we have more left for discussions. Lillian, yeah.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Very good. Maybe also the slides. Do you, I mean, should I present the slides, or is it coming from your
If possible,
side?
you can present it, please.
Okay, I'll do that.
We can hear and see you clearly.
Very good. Let me just make sure that I share the right slides. Up. And then share screen, I guess, and window. Okay. Do you see the slides?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon from my side. My name is Dan Dvořák. I'm the deputy head of Open Science and Research Infrastructure Unit from the Commission. Yes?
Sorry for interrupting you. Can you do a full screen picture when you share the?
That's this story with which is the main screen, and the second one. I'm not sure I will be able to easily do that. Maybe like that. Is that okay?
No, it's presenter mode still.
Yeah, try.
No?
No, it's visible, but I don't know if you can advance the slides like this.
I actually cannot even. I can.
I try to press F5. Maybe this works.
No, it's full screen. It's just that it's this story with two screens. Wait, maybe one of the very fast solution will be just switch off one screen, and then maybe it will be just done by that, like that. I hope I don't break something now. Sorry for this. Am I still sharing?
Not now.
Yes, okay.
Looks good.
It's, trying to do something, but it's very slow. Okay.
Otherwise, Stefan, you could share from your side.
This is
I think it should be. Oh, sorry.
this is what I try.
I can do it from here. If you allow me, Dijan, we will try to share the screen. Let me give it 1 second to upload it.
You will share it?
Yeah, I think that would be the best.
Let me try again because I have it now. It came through.
Okay, right.
And if I do now F5, is that okay now?
No.
No.
Oh my God.
Give me 1 second, so I.
Okay, I'll stop share. Then if you can.
Share the screen now. 1 second.
Okay, thanks a lot. Sorry for that. So okay, let's dive straight into. So I will present a little bit the reflection and ideas around the EOSC nodes and the model and thinking behind. If we go to the next slide. Maybe just a step back, a quick. I mean, I know that EOSC is a hot topic, and I'm sure most of you have been quite involved in these discussions and story. But just to highlight how EOSC really does have many facets or many faces, and it does have many dimensions to it, and it can be seen from perspective of being a process, like a way to accelerate open science, the fair data, and so on, to stimulate cooperation in science research, to share data, to share insights, knowledge, productivity, and so on. It can also be seen as a place where you go and you can find services, find data, where you kind of facilitate access to it. And it could be in some way also considered as some sort of an infrastructure. I'm not saying completely fully, but maybe over time that will become. And it is also, it has many layers. It has layers of national, has layer of EU, but also institutional level. So it has many dimensions, and sometimes it's difficult to grasp. I mean, to be able to just focus on one without touching the others. If we go to the next slide. Here, I would like to maybe now give a little bit of an idea of an EU node, where, of course, you know that as a federation, and I think that I swapped some slides, and I think that this is not the version that I've finalized, but okay, we'll come back to it later. But we have a federation, and federation, it's composed of elements, something that is federated, something that connects to each other, and the core idea is to have to call these elements node, at least at the top level. And of course, there can be some granularities what's within a node, but and one of the nodes is the EU node that is now, of course, you have probably all been informed and heard that we are approaching this through procurement action in a way where we would like to really make or place a seed in the ground, if I can say so, to operationalize the first kind of a EU level EOSC node and run it for first 3 years. That would facilitate, obviously, then the creation of web of fair data, of interoperable services, further advance on the open science policies, and so on. But to achieve all that, it needs to offer some core services, which were already described into interoperability framework, and we have heard about it before. So things like single sign-on, authentication, authorization, catalogs, knowledge graphs, cross-repository workflows or cross-service workflows. Then also capacities of monitoring and accounting and so on. So there are a number of core services that such a node, and particularly EU node, would offer. Some of them may be also central to other nodes. Maybe other nodes may decide to use some of them and kind of connect to them and use these services as one of their core services the same. Of course, that does not prevent that potentially other, but of course interoperable core services may be implement kind of come up in other nodes. But definitely, and you know, the attempt is to really define this kind of a blueprint. I sometimes say template, but I think blueprint is a better word, of how a node would be and what would it entail, and then it's probably not the only model, and probably it will evolve over time, because we will of course all learn what works, what doesn't, what can be improved, but it's a start really to create something tangible. If we go to the next slide. So this is the slide that I wanted to show first, but nevertheless, you see, as I said, we have a federation and we will have users across Europe. And of course, from the user perspective, what it's relevant is that, you know, when they want to do research, or when they want to use data, or when they want to share a service, that they know how to do it, that they know that this is reliable, that there is a service around. If something doesn't work, they know who to call. If there are legal issues, that there are ways of addressing that. When they are that it has all the elements that we are also, all of us, probably quite used from also commercial environments where we do use cloud services all the time, from all the majors and providers that we know out there. And of course, the federation will be composed, like I said, of many nodes. They will be at the institutional level, they will be on national level, they can be at the thematic level. There may be other things that we will integrate, maybe through Simple with other data spaces. So our federation may link to other federations or other type of kind of a assembly. It can be also underpinned by, I mean, our federation will be probably underpinned by number of rules that hopefully we will together come up with, some sort of a minimal, let's say, rules, as we call them, or policies. What a node is and what each user or service provider or node operator should kind of adhere to. If we go to the next slide, some of the characteristics what the EU node would offer, of course, is, I mentioned, right? It is multidisciplinary, multinational, so across EU. It will integrate with things like EduGain and EU login and e-IDAS. It is, as it is being procured for now, fully owned by Commission. But of course, there are reflections of how will this look in the future, and there are, of course, options that are quite open there. It may go in different directions. What I said is really important, that it's properly operated and maintained, that is fully available on the high level as we are used to with commercial services. Also, one of the things that I often say is how important it is, for example, if a researcher starts using a service today and maybe research stems over several years, it would be very pity for them that they need to reinvent the service if after 2 years it disappears from the federation. So that's so important, that there is some stability, that there is some anchor, that there are some things that are there and there, that we know that they're reliable, and that there is a maintenance plan for it for over longer term. We will, of course, there will be an idea is to integrate with Simple in order to connect with other data spaces. There are discussions and reflections if and how Euro HPC resources could be offered in the context of EOSC Federation, and of course, open to other nodes. If you go to the next slide. Maybe a few words about the procurement, as this is also, I think, quite recent and important subject, because it definitely starts to making a shape of something very concrete of this EU node. So you know that the procurement has been launched earlier this year. there was a whole process of submission of tenders and then evaluation. And very recently, in a few weeks ago, the contracts have been signed with the winners. Just to give you an idea of how the procurement has been structured, it was 3 lots. One lot, and lot 1, was about really those EOSC core platform and services, and also some interfaces, like typically the user interface. Lot 2 and 3 were more around the services. Lot 2 more about infrastructure services, things like containers, virtual machines, storage. And lot 3 was more about services related to collaboration, interactive data analytics, visualization of data, and a number of other application services. So the lot 2 more infrastructure, and lot 3 more application services. And indeed, we have now the results. And if we go to the next slide, I would like to mention here about the awardees. So we have on core, we have the Athena Consortium with number of very well-known players that have been around also EOSC for quite from the beginning, some of them, and for a long time, and are well established. And I think that they have a good capacity to really deliver on this ambition. And then there is the exchange side with the PSNC, which is the main contractor. So the difference between the Athena and PSNC is really Athena is a consortium, while PSNC is contracting directly with a number of subcontractors, some of them commercial side, but some of them also from the, I would say, research community. So I think that the balance is very good and promises a lot. We really are looking forward to first kickoff meetings and then first, milestones achieved. And we would be, of course, we will keep the community well informed. In any occasion where there will be an opportunity, we will, of course, try to raise awareness of what's already there, what's coming. So that because it's for us, it's very important that this is very well taken up by the community, and that it really serves the purpose of the community. So I would wrap it up here from my side, just to give an overview of what's going on from perspective of the Commission, and I give back to the floor to back to Valencia.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Dejan. It was a very good view inside the implementation and the planning as it is now of the EOSC EU node. For myself, I'm not really surprised, but I'm more happy to see who are the winners, which are visible here. And what comes in my mind when I have a look at the last slide is that I see mainly NRENs here, or big organizations which are connected to NRENs, which is, I think, a very deep logic of the EOSC core node at the moment. But this brings me to a question about sustainability. Yeah, when I do not want to look too much into the future, but what we see here is very well experienced institutions and networks working together to make this possible. But how is the view on a sustainable EOSC EU node here? So what would you expect that has to be done to keep it alive and to let it grow as the overall EU EOSC node?
Yeah, that's a very important question. I agree. And the reply in this question probably lies in many, like we can see it in, let's say, in a couple of phases, or 3 phases, I would say, or at least 3 phases. One is immediate, right? One is making sure that, this contract now and this consortia, that they get together, that they really, I think that the offers were strong. I think that they are realistic. It seems that something that can be really, we can look forward to see how it will work in practice. So first step is really delivering on what has been now signed and the services that have been agreed. And of course, immediately together with that, hands in hand goes, the uptake of by the community, making sure that this is really operational, really useful to the community, really, I would, some people were asking sometimes, yeah, but what if we have too many users? I think that's just good. Maybe the more users, the better, right? But the quality of service has to be there, and that's so important. We are so spoiled by by commercial world with the apps that we have on our phones, or systems that we use online. Everything often works very fast and very stable and very reliable, and that's what we need to deliver to the users. That's so important. But then, of course, there are two questions after. One is, what after the contract finishes? Because this consortium and contracts that are there, they are established for the time, for the life of the contract. We don't have an answer for it, but of course that's a very important question to address. And then, of course, what comes after? How will EOSC look in the future? How will this be organized from the perspective of governance, from the perspective of funding, from the perspective of operating this in the long term? And these are discussions that are very active now within the EOSC community at different levels. But of course, these are not easy questions to answer. They come with all sorts of dimensions that bring complexity, and of course, different types of solutions may require different political ambitions, or different commitments by the member states, or different commitment by the EU or Commission, or different way of managing the whole thing. So there are several options out there, but the answers are not yet. We don't have them. So we are evaluating, and this is a process, and I think it will still take some time. I also am quite confident that we still have a bit of time before we need to decide. Not too much. We need to keep in mind that the next MFF, next multi-annual financial framework, is coming, and a lot of discussions will start to sprout around it. So we need to be ready to provide some answers by the time that this will be needed. But a little bit of reflection to take the the wise decision, if I can say so, what is best for EOSC, and so that we can really move that to another level. It will still take a bit of time.
Okay, thank you for your answer. That faces to a very interesting time in the near future. Are there any other questions here in the room, for example, or comments or remarks you want to make to this presentation? Because if not, I would say we go to the next presentation.
Stefan, if I may just quickly, I would mention that I will need to leave very soon. I have another commitment coming up. But my colleague Peter Segedi, he's also part of the meeting. He's an expert on this subject, so he will stay for the questions at the end. So if there are any things that they might need to be answered, you will have an opportunity to.
Thank you. Thanks for considering. Okay, this brings me to our next speaker, who is Volker Beckmann. I've seen you. Are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me? And you can see my slides, I guess.
We can hear you and see you clearly.
Okay, very good. And the slide also.
Yes.
Okay, very good. So thanks, Stefan, for the introduction. So this adds directly into what Dejan has described. So this discussion we have at the ESFRI EOSC task force. So it's not the EOSC ESFRI task force. The center of attention is here on the ESFRIs and how we can serve them better, and how we can reply better to their needs, and how we can integrate them or federate them in the EOSC ecosystem with added value for both sides. So so we have two objectives there in this task force. One is to ensure a structured interface between the ESFRI forum and the EOSC steering board, and this should go a bit beyond what we have done before, and then to facilitate common and or complementary strategies for the further uptake of open science practices and the further deployment of the FAIR principles, as well as the accelerated connection of the research infrastructures included in the ESFRI roadmaps and the ERICs in the EOS Federation. So these are the objectives, and we have decided in this task force, which we created in June, to have two topics to work on first, because we have to focus if we want to get something done. So the first topic is help reduce fragmentation of the research data landscape in Europe by stimulating the connection of ESFRI research infrastructures and ERICs to the EOS Federation. And this addresses especially the point we don't want to redo things in the EOS which are already existing at the ESFRI level. We don't want to replace something there. We want to connect things. And for this, we have to know how far are the ESFRIs and what did they achieve already, and what is their expectation towards the EOSC. And then the second point is assist in increasing of fair research data productivity in Europe. So this goes in verification of data, preservation and curation, and coordinated approaches to cross-domain deployment of common tools. So this already goes a bit in the direction what Dejan has shown a moment ago on this, what tools can we provide perhaps on the EOS level, which are beneficial to a wider range of research infrastructures. So this is a very small task force. So you have the Commission, the ESFRI Forum, and the Steering Board with each 2 members, and then you have some observers from the ERIC Forum, the EO Forum, EOS Association, e-IRG, and then on a rotational basis, 1 representative of European research infrastructure networks. The difference between observer and member is not so important in principle. I mean, we all speak there, we all put our knowledge together in order to advance things. So what is our approach? So we first want to analyze the current situation. So we want to determine the gaps and the bottlenecks we have. So very practical, what needs to be done. And we want to identify advanced key actors. So who might help us in identifying if the EOS core, the EOS EU node, is doing what it should be doing, not only for the long tail of science, but also for the large research infrastructures like the ESFRIs. And we want to highlight successful approaches and solutions. Perhaps we can learn something there, which we can put in place at the EOS level. And finally, of course, it's kind of a policy driving task force. So we want to provide recommendations and input to policies and programs. So how do we want to do this? So we are going to organize a workshop in January next year in order to discuss with some ESFRIs, with some ERICs, with some partners, a few burning questions. So the goal is to analyze the current situation and the perspectives in the productivity of fair data sets, etc., etc. And we want to address the opportunities and implications of artificial intelligence. And we have heard earlier today in the morning already some exciting examples what the perspectives with AI are. And I think this is something we really have to look into in order to boost our productivity. Then we have, in order to prepare this workshop, we thought of some questions we want to ask. So we are going to invite research infrastructures and also the ESFRI clusters, the thematic clusters. So we were going to ask them, so what is the goal of ideal fair data productivity and proper quality control? What is your current fair data productivity level in your research infrastructures? Can you tell us what the bottlenecks are that limit your fair data productivity, and which services would you expect from EOSC in order to help you? Is the answer, I don't need any services from the EOSC, or can we identify some which would help you in doing this? And I'm pretty sure that the answer there is not the same for each ESFRI. It's not the same for each ERIC. So we have to really carefully listen in order to have a good overview of what is needed there. So, and then the second part, of course, the AI part. So how could AI supporting tools and solutions improve fair data management? and how are AI-based research protocols impacting or expected to impact your field and your research infrastructure, your cluster, and what is the role of fair data in training and monitoring AI algorithms. So these are really down-to-earth questions, I think, where probably all of you in your research infrastructures, you say, well, this is where my bottleneck is, and this is what I would need, and this is what I would expect from EOS to help me with. So it's a workshop by invitation. We had to limit this a bit. So it's the steering board, the task force members, there's mostly overlap, but there are some in addition, some e-IRG experts, EOSC Association, some from the ESFRI Digit science working groups, and then we have some specially invited speakers. Of course, the commission is there, and EOSC Association experts I have twice here even. So it's going to be a noon to noon workshop, and invitations are going to go out very soon. So just to summarize this, so what do we want to do? We saw now the presentation by the commission. So what we are going to have in the EOSC EU node. There was the question of the what happens after the procurement, and we have had this week, we had the discussion in the steering board and in the tripartite what models we want to go for. And I think it's fair to say that all the models we considered, this is of course not a guarantee, would include something which guarantees the EU node to be run continuously through the next framework program with some external entity involved there. So it's really away from this project approach to something which is permanently supported. And then, of course, the main question is, how do we make this attractive for the ESFRIs, the ERICs, because we need their data in the EOSC. We need their experience, their services, and we want to help them, right? We want to make this attractive for them. So apart from the long tail of science, what do we have to do? What can we do for the ESFRI clusters and for the ERICs? So we want to avoid this fragmentation, and we want to really bring this all together, increase fair data productivity. So we analyze now the situation. We are about to identify key actors which can perhaps also tell us what they can use from the EU node. We want to highlight some success stories and provide recommendations and policy input. And of course, as I said already, what is also on our agenda is the relation of ESFRIs and ERICs to the EOSC EU node, but also how do they play in this landscape with the EOSC thematic national infrastructure nodes. For example, the ESFRIs could be seen as nodes in the EOSC ecosystem. This is something we are discussing. And of course, also everybody is discussing that recommendations for EOSC after 207, after 2027. Thanks, Stefan.
Thank you, Volker, for your very brief and comprehensive more or less report from the views from the ESFRI EOSC task force. I think you mentioned a very or a couple of very sensitive subjects here, and also asked the right questions. Let me give at the beginning a short remark. It is always the question, not only in the direction what can the EOSC do for the ESFRIs, it's the other way around as well. So what can the ESFRIs do for EOSC with respect to fair data productivity? That brings me to my main let's say to my main point. I think that the outcome of this task force to focus on fair data productivity is rather important because time is passing by. I guess it is necessary also to speeden up this process. I can also refer to the results of the EOSC Lustrum, which is more or less also stated in the paper we've want to publish or published now. It is that there are some phases necessary to get at the end to the fair data productivity we are looking for. So I'm convinced that this is a very, let's say, a very good direction the task force is going. and I'm looking forward to the meeting we have in January. I think there will be a lot of following discussions on these items, but I'm very positive concerning also the working load that the infrastructures and the EOSC as a whole is putting into this. So many thanks, Volker, and the floor is open for immediate questions if you have some. Otherwise, we transfer discussions later on. Okay, so I would say we can go to the next slide. Thank you, Volker. Okay, our next speaker. Sorry? Yes, I'm waiting for Bob. Yes, here in the room, very exclusively. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Go ahead.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. So what I will try and do is give you an overview on the EOSC Association's position on the question of nodes and the federation. To do that, I'll start by highlighting for some of you who probably know what is the EOSC Association. So it's very much sort of the voice of the community in that we try to bring together all of the different actors involved in the European Open Science Cloud across Europe together, and in order to converge on opinions and direction across the whole of Europe and dots different sectors as well. The membership has continuously grown. This is slightly out of date. We had a General Assembly a week ago, so there's within 10, it's approximately right. Some numbers have come and some have left. But you see we have over 250 member organizations of the association from all across Europe. The majority are indeed research performing organizations. So these are labs, universities, and so on, research infrastructures. There's some research funding organizations there as well, and service providers. And there's an overlap, of course. Some service providers are also research performing organizations as well. And then other organizations, there are some commercial entities involved as well, SMEs, who want to contribute to the European Open Science Cloud overall as well. But overall, it is driven primarily by the research performing and the service providing organizations. It was set up in 2020, this very official looking document to create it with the first 4 founding members, and that's grown. And you can see Catherine Stover's signature there on the piece of paper as well. Jean was one of the founding members. And it's there really much to provide this voice for advocacy and representation of all the stakeholder community. And as I said, try and bring us some alignment at the European level for policies and priorities, and help to provide some coordination there. And then above all, to get some seamless access to these interoperating fair supporting services and help us support the overall research data lifecycle. Using that legal entity, the EOSC Association, and working with the Commission, a co-program partnership has been set up in 2020. So those are the two elements in there. And when you see things like the tripartite management, it's linked to the co-program partnership as well. And what that's done is it's been able to focus and channel 1 billion euros of funding towards the needs of EOSC over the lifetime Horizon 2020, Horizon Europe. Half of that comes from the European Commission through the forms of grants and procurements and so on. And the other half is contributed in kind as additional activities from the members themselves and beyond those. So the commitments that we see inside the member states and the contributing organizations is really impressive in the amount that they are investing in open science and contributing towards the establishment of the European Open Science Cloud. Also, what's happening is through those EC-funded projects, we're trying to establish collaboration between them as much as possible. We heard already yesterday about we have to be careful not to reinvent the wheel and repeat what other projects are doing. So that's one of the goals of what the association does. We try to bring together all these different projects who are funded to contribute towards EOSC to work together and ensure that we're not leaving any gaps and we're not duplicating each other's work, and try to get alignment on these points as well. There's also a number of task forces, but I think Helen mentioned this already. She did a lot better job about it than I could. So, but just to say that we do count very much on the 400 volunteers who contribute to the association to formulate the opinions and the work that goes on inside the association. And many of these are also representatives and involved in some of those projects as well. The major outputs in the association are the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda. If you want, it's the big document that highlights what's the objectives for the EOSC and what we should be doing over a number of years, with these three key objectives, which were already mentioned this morning, so you can see them there as well. And then trying to do it in a multi-annual roadmap and come up with the phases of it. As you see, we're now discussing actively what will be in the third phase, 2025, 2027. And this is used in particular by the European Commission, so on, to help them formulate what becomes the funding calls, which are then released as part of the EOSC overall theme. So being a member of the association means that you can contribute to these activities and help formulate some of this direction as well. So specifically on the nodes, Diane already mentioned the procurement. This was highlighted at our General Assembly in spring this year, and it became apparent that not everybody in the Assembly was very much aware of what the procurement was about, how it was working, and so on. So we took on board the role to try and gather that together and formulate a common approach and opinion on how this worked. So we started some preparatory meetings in July with the mandated organizations to explain to you what a mandated organization is. Inside the membership of the association, there are many individual members per country, and they collectively assign or nominate one mandated organization that speaks on behalf of those countries, and it has a specific role also in some of the voting duties inside the association. So we worked with the mandated organizations basically to get a national point of view, but we also worked with we have an ESFRI working group as well to prepare for this September workshop. So we saw sort of the thematic points of view, and we also saw sort of the national points of view. And then we formulated these three events in September. So one with the mandated organizations, one with the ESFRIs, and then a session at the symposium held in Madrid, the non-conference session, where we had round tables. I think there's about 9 round tables. It was co-organized with our colleagues from Gio. And in total, across those 3 different events, approximately 150 people were consulted in providing input on the thoughts and themes around nodes. And we had a number of provocative questions to start that discussion and extract information from them. And so that was all pulled together, and using that information, we produced a brief 2-page paper, which gives a view of what we've understood of what is the EOS Federation and what are the EOS nodes. That was distributed to those 150 people, participants, in October, and we gathered feedback. I think we got 12 sets of written feedback on it, and that feedback was used to refine the paper, and now a second version has been produced. So the paper is there on the link. It's only 2 pages, but you don't have to read it all the way through if you don't want to. But just to say the key points in there. So from the Federation, we see very much, as is written in the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda and confirmed in these events, that is a federation of distributed systems, so a system of systems. And it's not a greenfield activity. It's very much recognized that most of the elements of this distributed systems are already there and exist. They're not labeled EOSC, of course. They have different communities and different things, but they're there already. Okay, and the intention is to enable collaboration to achieve the common goals of working together. Basically, that's why it's a federation, but also enable users to access additional resources beyond their usual environment. This is a way of saying, very similar to what was said yesterday when we were talking about the cancer environment. This is very similar to the idea of encouraging and enabling secondary usage of data and services. So things beyond your own community, beyond your own discipline, being able to reuse the data and services from other communities and services as well. And that the Federation has a number of policies and rules defined by the legal entity governing the EOSC Federation. So there will have to be some legal entity that takes responsibility for the Federation in the end. We can't really avoid that. There has to be some governance model in place. And that will need some basic rules and policies of how can you participate in the Federation. And that the Federation itself will consist of multiple nodes. We've heard today from Nyan, he described very, very clearly one of the nodes, the EC node, but we expect there are going to be multiple nodes, and that the Federation is made up of many of these. There'll be some at the start, but it can be scaled by adding more as time goes by. Just because a country or an institute or a discipline is not in the first set of nodes that get established doesn't mean they're excluded. It will be inclusive. They can be added in time and so on, because we know that people and organizations have different roadmaps, different timescales, and we have to allow them to come in. Then for the nodes themselves, so those can we say they contain what we refer to as resources. So that can be basically fair data and associated services that add value to the Federation. But they can also be, if you want, non-technical services as well. Thinking about training that was discussed this morning, that's an important contribution that adds value to the Federation as well. But the nodes have the role of acting as a legal representative that can interact with the EOS governance structure. It's important that the nodes are answerable and can speak on behalf of the resources that they represent. And we know that this is a difficult concept, and many researchers say, well, we don't have a legal representation. Well, if you look around, in fact, in most cases, they always do have some legal representation, but it may be not directly impacted them. It may be the university overall, might be the institute, may be the government, and so on. But there is some legal representation. But we recognize that this can be a complex story, and we need to tread carefully how we do this. Of course, the people doing this are not lawyers, right? So when we get the basic principles agreed, then we can go to the lawyers and figure out exactly what is the necessary legal representation needed, okay? And of course, nodes are autonomous in the sense that they control their own operations and resources, but they do have the responsibility to ensure that the policies are followed within the node. So the federation level policies have to be followed within their node, okay? But of course, they can vary in the local policies. One can imagine, if you think of the examples for licensed software offered for a service in a particular node may not be available to absolutely everybody on the planet, okay? So there might be different policies there about how that can be accessed. But also the resources can vary in terms of the resources they offer. Of course, we don't expect all the nodes to offer the same thing. and that the infrastructure in which they are built, there's not going to be one single implementation of a node, right? And one type of hardware in which it's running, or digital repository software in which it's going to run in. There's going to be different versions of these things. So the intention is that initiatives, be them at the European, national, regional, institutional, thematic, can join the federation and become EOS nodes when they meet these sort of listed requirements above. And I think you have to realize as well is that the way we're looking at this is an iterative model, in the sense we'll start with a basic set of rules and outline of the federation and nodes. And over time, as we gather more experience with it, we will refine that material. Okay, but it doesn't mean that people will become excluded if they're already in, and then the rules change a little bit as going forward. Okay. So the text has been revised. You can look at it online there as well. And we're some of the points we're deliberately trying to keep it short. Okay, lots of people are asking in the feedback, but what about this end use case or this other case and things like that? We recognize they're there, but we're trying deliberately to keep it short. Okay. There are other things. I've mentioned the legal representation, the scale of the node and the necessary interfaces that it has to provide. There's the interoperability framework, which we want to use as the basis for this. So there will be elements which perhaps are not detailed enough. But for us, that's a second step. We want to see that coming later. But at the moment, we're just welcoming more feedback on the paper. You can, if you want to look at it and provide some of your own feedback, and the deadline for providing that feedback is the 10th of December. What do we see happening afterwards? So we've drafted this paper, and in general, the feedback we've got is, if you want on some of the details of it, no one's come back along and said absolutely no, can't believe in it, don't believe in the whole idea of nodes and federation. So we think it's got general acceptance in that way. And we'll continue to try and build on this to shaping the definition of the federation and the role of EOS nodes, but not in this paper. We will start other material which can go into more detail, but this will be the summary, high-level stuff that we can use, okay? So we want to try and do that in 2024. The target that we're aiming for, which we think is necessary, is that you look around, many of the research infrastructures already have similar material that governs the way their research infrastructure systems operate and are governed. And one of the good examples we've given here is the Elexia Handbook of Operations. We picked that one because even if you're not involved in Elexia, you can understand what's written in it. Okay, so that's not the case for all the other ones we've seen. Yeah, so we've given that one as an example, but that's to show you the sort of thing we're trying to aim for in the end. Yeah, and if you look at the chapter headings in there, those are the sort of things we need, that this material in the end is going to need to cover. Okay. All right. So that's the current status for the moment. That's where we're intending to go in the future. And I said, if you have any further feedback, you can submit it online to us that way as well. Okay, that's it.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Bob. It was a very good insight on the views of the association, and you mentioned several points which I guess are essential, namely the fact, for example, that there are a lot of services pre-existing from the research infrastructures we are using, and it's sometimes, for me at least, difficult to see where in the nodes concept all these services are visible. Yeah, because we're using them, we need them, they are running in the background. But I'm convinced that this will be figured out due to its development. And the second part of my remark would be the big issue, the federational aspect. And what do you personally think, or do you think as association, concerning the time constraints? I mean, federation is something, it's a process. It's nothing you can switch on or switch off. How would you see let's say the time perspective of all of this? Because I think my personal view is that these processes need a lot of time. A lot has been done so far. This is not, we are not starting from zero here, I guess, but what feeling do you have concerning this time constraints?
Yeah, so I think it's, I think we should also recognize that this has come to a head because of the completion of the ongoing EOSC EU node procurement, okay? So I think it was actually on Diane's slide saying that, you know, it's a stake in the ground or a seed. So that can be a starting point. My understanding is that that should become operational early in 2024. Now, of course, as was highlighted when we talked to some through these different events we organize, you can only have a federation if you're at least 2. Otherwise, how do you actually test it's a federation, right? So we're going to need to at least have some early volunteers, and you know, there's been talk inside the research infrastructures of some of those coming forward as early volunteers to also create nodes which can then be used to actually test this concept. Okay. Now, if we can start doing that in 2024, I think it's a good move. But I think it is very much a progressive thing that's going to be a multi-year activity. It's not something that's going to be completed in a few months.
Thank you. Are there some other additional remarks or questions here? Yeah, I see one from here.
Yeah, I have a question, Bob. What will be the position of those that are already part of this federation that we already have? Because EOSC is already existing, right? Will there be a transitional process where they can choose what node to join, or how do you envision this?
So we've been looking at this already with what's been achieved with the EOSC Future project. Okay, there's been quite a lot of activity there of onboarding a number of services, so on, into the structures put in place by EOSC Future. Now we have to see how the onboarding process, as far as we could see, was primarily looking at the technical compatibility with the profiles which were defined inside EOSC Future. What we also have to see is what are going to be the first set of the overall federation policy questions, okay? And they're going to be laid out as the policy rules. And how does the criteria that we used, for example, with EOSC Future, how does that map to those ones which will be sort of in the first version for the EOSC Federation, right? So we're going to need to have some mechanism for transferring across those ones which qualify. What qualify means at the moment, I can't tell you, all right? But we're going to need some mechanism not to waste the effort that's already been put into place to onboarding those things. Yeah.
Thank you very much for these clear words. Thank you. I think we can go to our next speaker before we make a coffee break. In this case, I think
The infrastructure assembly views
yes.
with a bunch of presentations.
So it's more than one person now, but I think that Tiziana will start. Is it right? Very fine.
Should be on the agenda. So this is a second contribution of the infrastructure assembly to the workshop this week. And what you will see is a collection of viewpoints on the topic of the EOSC Federation. I think this is, yes. And this time we will have different contributions. We didn't really have the time internally to yet align visions, so they will be quite different. We will see contributions coming from personal views and experience based on projects, community visions, but also how infrastructures some see themselves relating to the federation. And I hope these different contributions can also provide the grounds on how the, no, I don't think this is the one. It's presentation 4 in the folder. Okay. So these different presentations, I hope will contribute to further ideas on the next steps of the Federation and the work of the Commission and the Board of Directors and the paper that Bob just presented. I think this is one, yes. Now this is the, yeah, okay, the list of speakers is not the one, but no problem. So can you see how to move forward? Yes, this is correct. So I will be the first in the line, and then we will hear the voice of Jos from UDAT, followed by the presentation by Licia that will illustrate the Jean community reflections on the topic, and then Natalia remotely from OpenAir. So I like to start with my contribution, which is my personal contribution, is not reflecting a general position of the GI Federation. And I like to bring some grounds to the discussion of the Federation, looking at how in position papers and feedback that was provided by a number of EOSC stakeholders, how this Federation could be organized. We heard from Bob a lot on how the governance structure, the division of labor and cooperation could work. And I'd like to bring a complementary vision to this discussion, which is what are the Federation needs that would drive the governance? Governance is needed to the extent that there are common problems and general federated processes to be implemented. And one key overarching topic that is important to be addressed is what are the functions that are devolved to the Federation members, and what are the functions that are in the hands of the coordinator or the federator of a federation. And the right of federation governance structure typically addresses exactly this repartition of labor and decision-making. So with my next slides, I'd like to bring some papers that I hope bring also the view of some important research infrastructures and data federators in the research domain, and based on this input, progress with the discussion. And first of all, I'd like to bring to your attention a position paper that was published back in 2019, so a few years ago, still very relevant to the topic of federation, which shows in this example, it's an excerpt from this paper from the Blue Cloud community. This is the paragraph which details what is the value proposition of the EOSC Federation from the point of view of an existing established pan-European data integrator, in this case active in the aquatic science domain. And I'd like really to in essence repeat the words, because this is the voice of the community, and first they would expect in terms of value proposition from a EOSC Federation the provisioning of generic e-infrastructure services, including elements that we see already in the EU node, like federated AAI, but also PIDs, and also access to resources such as HPC, storage, and cloud computing. This is obviously an element which is very core to this workshop, where infrastructures are being discussed, but also to research infrastructures, because these facilities sometimes come from research infrastructures and from their nodes, either central or distributed. Sometimes they come from national investments, like the infrastructures, for example, in EGI, all the federation is in fact based on national funding and research budgets. And this infrastructure is federated and can be used for secondary access to data if there are the right funding models which allow this data to be deposited, hosted, mirrored, and analyzed. The second bullet point in their vision is that there is a seamless access to other thematic clouds to support multidisciplinary science. So here, Blue Cloud is in fact a data holder, reusing the terminology that we heard from the data spaces yesterday. And as a data holder, they would see a potential in having their data integrated with complementary data, which is relevant to multidisciplinary science. And this data cannot come from this specific research community. It has to come from other data holders from the research community. And this is another element which already indicates what is the kind of federation that this EOSC should deliver. It's an ability to integrate data coming from multiple data holders while respecting their own governance and ownership and policies in delivering the data. The third element is an ability to use APIs to reuse services and broaden through secondary use services already delivered by this community. So the data infrastructure not only brings data, but also brings services to extract data products from the raw data. And these services would have to be open and integratable through APIs, which have to be diverse, depend on the scientific domain, but have to come together for being accessible to the end user. And finally, a framework for creating awareness on the importance and best practices for fair data and providing training and data management. So this is the human component and the policy component in this position paper, which is in order to have a federation, you need compliance or conformance. If it's not a standard, it's a best practice to a number of guidelines, let's call them rules of participation, that allow the federation members to agree on a common layer that builds the glue across the federation. And a similar voice can also be heard from another position paper. This time is the ESFRI FAIR position paper, also published and available in Zenodo if you want to see the full paper. And in this screenshot taken from the document, we see what are the needs from the EOSC and what are the contributions. So what can this ESFRI FAIR community bring again as a data holder? And in this screenshot, we see the two perspectives. We see the research community as a consumer and the role as federation member of a potential larger cluster of research infrastructures. With ESFRI, we are still in the environmental domain. At this time, of course, a very large spectrum of different research infrastructures, which however managed to align their vision around the federation. And as a user, they would see generic infrastructure services, again, AAI, PID, provenance, for tailoring to specific research infrastructure needs and adoption by individual research infrastructures, workflow management tools and services for tailoring to specific research infrastructure needs, access to shared resources such as repositories, HPC, HTC, and data management tools. And again, this is again given the perspective of how horizontal services integrate and bind with the thematic ones. And the fourth aspect is, again, APIs to support remote data discovery, access, and sharing. So this is, again, another important functional element that should drive the governance and the architecture of the federation, complemented by the provisioning of notebooks-based environments, so data analytics tools that extract value from the data and, in the end, deliver discoveries and new knowledge. On the other end, here in the second part of the slide, we see the provider vision of the federation. So ESFRI as a community would provide collective domain-specific knowledge and competencies that underline the data and the services coming from their constituency. So they are a provider of assets that build the federated infrastructure of services and data, but also they bring the competency, which means as a federated function, it's also a matter of how we integrate these competencies and make them available to users, which in a way is an aspect we already touched in the morning on skills. But this is really how you mobilize the expertise and you make the federated elements available for active exploitation. The second component is fair-based tools and resources for easy and seamless access to environmental data and services provided by ESFRI. So active role as provider of assets. And finally, a federated machine-to-machine interface to access environmental data and services provided by the contributing ENVRIs. So maintaining, I would say, the programmatic aspects of these services and the ownership on how the data is accessible, discoverable, because this is where the knowledge of the data rests. So this is my last slide, and I'm moving to the last part of the presentation, and it's again broadening further on the perspective of research communities towards federation. For the sake of timekeeping, I could not bring other position papers, but all the clusters, looking also at the physics clusters, the photon and neutron clusters, and also social sciences and humanities have similar papers, and we could see recurring items and requirements in these papers. This is the, in a way, summa of all these messages. And I think it's relevant again to the federation because it brings at the top and at the bottom of this stack of layers, the infrastructure services. At the bottom, the scientific community's content and the users. So they have the network of users. The research infrastructures will bring the assets for open science, and then the open science policies and interoperability standards as non-tangible asset, which implements the federation. And with this, I like then to summarize some of these federated capabilities. And I hope, Bob, that the board of directors in the next steps can also facilitate this activity on what will be the federated functions that the proper governance has to bring together. And this is just an attempt to summarize some of the points which came from the previous slides. So examples of federated technical functions, we have discovery, the access channels, which are an integral element of governance, data deposition and preservation, federated identity and access management, and we could extend this list further. It doesn't want to be extensive, but just to say, understanding what will be a federated function is important because a federated function has a federated governance and all the members have to agree to delegate decision role to the federator. And other examples also concern what are the processes which implement a federation. The access policies are key because they determine the conditions for being able to use assets in the federation. The support structures to access the research commons and interoperability framework maintenance as the glue for the compatibility, but also how all this data and services come together from infrastructures and research infrastructures. We will need to know and understand how the federated provisioning works, how the service level agreements to the users will be organized, what will be the operational level agreements with the suppliers coming from different constituencies and different stakeholders can be organized. And all of that is an integral element of the business process that EOSC has to define. So this is my last slide, and it's attempted to depict my own vision for evolving the concept of the federation. And maybe I have the possibility to move a pointer, yes. So we have discussed in many fora how the existing national infrastructures and European infrastructures, thematic, regional, national, in all different scopes can come together. Well, in a way, they are already existing pillars. And today, quite often we work in silos. We have bilateral agreements and integrations. And the clusters are good examples which already provide some integrated approach to their data. But we have also examples of integration across infrastructures, for example, with GEAN and EGI on AAI, EU.EGI on solutions for integrated data management, with OpenAir for discovery, and so forth. So we have the blue pillars in the picture. This is the starting point of EOSC. So what can EOSC bring as complementary layer and federated layer without disrupting the existing governance? So the three orange horizontal layers bring three elements of the commons. starting from the bottom, the infrastructure commons, so the facilities for data deposition, for mirroring data, making it collocated with computing where necessary, but also the observatories. I find that quite often there is no explicit mention of all the instruments that research infrastructures in fact implement, and these are elements for also delivering science. In a way, they are part of the science commons of Europe. They're already part of transactional access programs, and shouldn't this also be considered elements of a federated infrastructure of Europe? On top of that, the federated data commons, which of course come from the data infrastructures, but they may be a subset, only those that comply to the FAIR guidelines and the interoperability framework of EOSC. We may have here in the picture other assets in terms of infrastructure, observatories, data, and software and services, which retain complete control by the existing infrastructures, retain their current access policies, and they are not accessible if this is not considered viable across EOSC. So this, I hope, wants to capture the fact that existing infrastructures may have a part of their infrastructure assets which remain entirely under the local governance with existing governance structures, but part of these, so these blue vertical pillars, can be shared in EOSC to the extent they are relevant for secondary use and for multidisciplinary science. And of course, the orange part will have to comply to some general rules of participation defined in EOSC. And the third layer is the application layer, and also where artificial intelligence and methods come together with tools and analytics. These are instruments necessary, very thematic and discipline specific. Data cannot be used successfully without these tools, and they should be considered integrally part of the commons as well. So how do the access channels work today? Every blue pillar typically today have their own channels towards their users, their own governance structures, and these of course should continue existing. But for things which are shared and federated in the EOSC, we can have complementary federating tools from the core, which is this vertical pillar here in orange, and they can have also complementary and EOSC-specific access channels. And this should not necessarily be incompatible. So this can be a further integration layer or additional access channel to purpose where this data and tools come together for multidisciplinary science. And then the federated governance that we're trying to define will in EOSC, of course, be scoped according to what is being federated in EOSC and only limited to the extent that an asset is shared in EOSC. So the governance that needs to be further defined and the business models would be limited to the parts of the commons which are really integrated and federated in EOSC. So the EOSC node, what it would be, and this is based on our EGI federation. A lot of capacity in the EGI federation comes from existing research data centers. They have total control of the capacity. This capacity may not be available for secondary use of data or to support research infrastructure because it's entirely pledged to specific user communities. But the part for transactional access that is available for multidisciplinary science to international user communities, which has EOSC-tailored access policies, can be part of an EOSC node. And this to say that, for example, as EGI stakeholder, we would be willing to discuss how part of the other facilities coming in the federation can be devoted to the exploitation of data from communities who are not, for example, already resource in-house to deliver computing. And this could be with proper funding models, which we hope should not depend on projects, be further sustained and linked to the business model of EOSC. And in our experience, transnational access is a key element of the federated access in Europe, also for research infrastructures. And we hope that through fora like this, we can also discuss with ESFRI community and research data infrastructures how they see transnational access be sustained in the future. Don't we have an opportunity in EOSC to integrally address the problem of transnational access in an institutional manner without having to depend on projects which make the necessary funding available to recuperate the marginal costs of these orange layers, which are shared beyond the constituency that is already part of these blue pillars. And this is the end of my contribution. I hope that perhaps some of the ideas can be further discussed today. So I'm really keen on having feedback. And with this, I'd like to give the voice to Jos for EUDAT.
Thank you, Tiziana. It was very terrific and very intense explanation of your views. I would propose that we summarize a discussion with all of you from the assembly presenting today, so that we skip it to the end of all the presentations. So, just be so kind.
Sorry? Yeah, it's the right one. I just need to, and there's just one slide, so at ease, please. The idea of for EUDAT, well, at the moment we gave it some thought, of course, on this relatively new concept of the EOS nodes. That is not to say that EUDAT partners they worked in several in the capacity of members in task forces on the definition on the work on this item, on this concept. But the first thing of a role in EUDAT is primarily in a opportunity to help federate upcoming organizations that are turned into a node, to integrate them, federate them with existing infrastructure, and to keep, let's say, at the basis of what we're doing in EUDAT, and that is to create value for users, that they so increase this by federating this with the higher services levels. I think that EUDAT is also in a particular good position for this, as they have members in many countries with local exposure, and also with a local interest in either national interest or thematic interest, where they can put their capacity into good use to integrate and federate with the EOSC ecosystem. That is not to say, of course, that it is would be very helpful if there is a kind of a governance structure. I mean, it was also helpful, of course, to know who you're going to call if you want to call EOSC. But at the moment, I think that the foremost exposed role will be to develop and help members to become part of this EOS node, and increase collaboration in that respect. Further things that can be noticed is, of course, that EUDAT then can serve as a mediator, as a broker. In a way, it's a kind of a plumber. Let's say the very for these matters. So it's a technical level where we can, of course, put the services that EUDAT operates put into good use. But I'm not excluding also mediating services of other infrastructures that are available and are more apt to the task that we have at that moment. I also think that there is some need for, in certain areas, for some impedance matching. We see that there is still a wealth of information and possibilities, of course, in EOSC available that is not fully understood on a technical level by people that would like to integrate. And of course, if they are now starting to talk about nodes, that is a top-down exercise, but it comes down to, in the end, on the technical level, and bring it to the researchers. and federating the services. And this is where I conclude, because I think that not everything is solved with a stack of papers and APIs and definitions, but you need to have people that can be called for how do we solve this. And I think that, for instance, EUDAT is in a good position to do that. Thank you. And now we go to...
Yes, next
Thanks a lot, Jos.
is, okay, OpenAIRE, Natalia. Do you wish us to advance the slides? Natalia, are you connected?
I am connected, but I'm not sure if these are the slides, but no, I'll go on.
Natalia, so we are ready.
Yes.
And just tell us how to advance.
Can you advance, please? Okay, so next one, yeah. Which one? So what I will present is I will present a very practical view, because I think, Bob and Tiziana and others have discussed all the high level. Just to give you an idea, and I will try to be quick, Stefan, is that, from the OpenAIRE side, the key service goals are about interoperability, discovery, monitoring, and learning. There are quite a few more, but I would like us to focus on that. Tiziana, if you can go to the next one, but there is animation also. There was supposed to be animation. Okay, so I will try to explain it very briefly. How we are working is that OpenAIRE has been working on the premises that there is existing infrastructure at the national and institutional level, repositories, journals, whatever is aggregate is used to publish data, software, publications and stuff. And then we have the OpenAIRE guidelines since 2008 in order as a metadata compliance and best practices, and we aggregate usage data, we aggregate PDFs because we're doing a lot of mining. And underneath this black arrow in the center there is the OpenAIRE graph, which is used as the core of the EOSC knowledge graph, now used in many projects, and also will be used in the Lot 1 procurement. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we have services like Explore, Connect, Monitor services that are being used by communities, by OpenAIRE, but also by communities. Just to give you a notable example here is that we are building, based on the OpenAIRE graph, the Irish Open Access Monitor, which is going to be one place for everyone in Ireland in order to come and see what is the open access uptake in publication, software, data, and all of this at the RFO, at the RPO level. What we would like to see, and so this is what we have now. So we have resources lying around in Europe or the world. We connect them, we collect them, we connect them, we do things, and then we somehow try through a central place, the OpenAIRE graph, in order to get information to different places. If you move to the next slide, how can we see now this? Okay, so that's a bit better now. So how do we see this federation from our side? What we see is that we are aggregating thousands of repositories out there, especially Europe has about 2,000 to 3,000 repositories, and that is a burden on the OpenAIRE side. It's very expensive, and what we find at the end is that the communities are not so much engaged. So what we would like is, we would like these national nodes to be or thematic nodes. I will stick to the national nodes because this is the main thing of OpenAIRE, is to take ownership of this process, to build national nodes where they can not just aggregate the data, but they can set the rules, they can follow the compliance rules, they can follow the best practices as we do in OpenAIRE and EOSC. So if we can have this blue box on the left side, the national node, that you have a national aggregator, and the aggregator also has the rules, the compliance, the practices, licenses, everything that has been discussed. Then in OpenAIR, we can give them the services, or we can support them for the interoperability framework in order to connect to the OpenAIR graph. And our job would be easier. We would have national nodes that know the ecosystem, the national ecosystem. So we would distribute the costs. And then at the end of the day, we would have this OpenAIR graph, which is global, or the EOS graph, which is local. And the same would be on the other side. So on the other side is that you can have services like what we have is the National Explorer. We have a National Explorer for Canada. We have Connect gateways based on the graph for various communities. What we would like to see, we have the Irish monitor now. What we would like to see is that the countries or the communities, they take ownership of these services. They do the engagement, they do, somewhat the technicalities they do, but we can support them and we can exchange data. If you go to the next slide, so this is very practical ways how we see the federation. And for us, this would be a blessing, because it would lower our costs, and automatically we would share costs among the national nodes. We would see an increased quality. Why? Due to local engagement and the knowledge that the people at the field have. We would have updated access modes and consequently business model, because what we can see is local deployments from OpenAIR software or from their own software. And all the implementation in the federation would be around the EOSC interoperability framework, or we can, and this is something that we would like to, this is something that we're putting on paper and discussing now internally in OpenAIR, is how can we have shared services? So we have this OpenAIR provide, the EOSC provide, the monitor and explore as a platform. And this is where this federation can work very, very nicely and conveniently, because then once you have these shared services and you put them in somewhere and it's owned by the EOS community, let's put it this way, then you make things easier because you have interoperability embedded in that. And the other thing is that once we do that, because we're talking about federation, technical, legal, organizational, but let's not forget the distribution of upskilled personnel and how we can federate. And I think it's somewhat happening now. We're waiting to see the Skills for Use project, what they're doing, is that this federation of competence centers, so how can we also make sure that we share all of these resources and knowledge. And we know that some of this is already happening in a few countries. And I think it's a very, very timely situation now, because as it's happening and as they're building up their national nodes and they're thinking of what a national node is, at least we can have a very, very simple solution that we can jointly offer, and it would be the first big step towards something that we can all feel like it's ours. That's the thing that I have. I know that the discussion here is more on the high level, but the point that I would also like to make is that at some point is that we need to be smart and simple, and not the low-hanging fruit, because this is not low-hanging fruit. I know that in some countries there is money for the national EOSC nodes or national open sciences, whatever they call them. It's an opportunity to do this together on a blueprint and start working on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalia. So with this, we can move to the next and last part of the presentation, which is for Licia, and is the...
Hello.
Hello. Licia, you want to advance your own slides, right?
Yes, I will prefer to do that.
Yeah. we need to then stop.
If you prefer, I can share my screen otherwise, whatever is easier.
You prefer to share your screen?
I don't know what, yeah, because I prefer to move my slides, so maybe it's easier if I share my screen.
Okay, so share it.
That's quicker. Okay, share. This one, slideshow. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So thanks everybody for having me here. My name is Licia Florio. I work for GEANT, and today I'm here to represent the GEANT community view on the EOSC node and partially on the EOSC Federation. So I'll be brief and to the point also because many of the speakers before me have already highlighted most of the things. So, and I think there is in general agreement, although as they say, the devil is in the details, so, but we don't have the time to discuss that. So the EOSC node, yes, it's sparkled a lot of discussion and unrest even in some cases, but I think it's nice to see how things are coming together now, that there is consensus on the fact that EOSC is the federation fabric for the EOSC node as a whole, meaning of all entities that participate in EOSC, and this federating layer will allow for everything to interoperate smoothly and will allow for resources to be shared and then found and discovered and accessed and eventually composed. There's been discussion of what the implementation of the node is. I mean, I think we have now clear for what the EU node implementation will look like, and that there is some expectation that other type of nodes will be implemented on a similar way, following a little bit the blueprint provided by the EOSC platform concept defined by the EOSC Future project. I don't think that will be the case. I think the nodes will be structured in a similar way, but not necessarily in this following the full implementation as the EU node. We have already example of nodes that are there thanks to the clusters, and each node is already a federation of providers, resources, and users with effectively their own independence, autonomy, governance, and a well-defined purpose as to why they exist, and which determines also at the end of the day the service that they are offering. So you have seen this picture in many presentations. I will not dwell on that, but it's really to focus on a little bit what the EOSC node, the EU node will provide, and that is really this federating layer for the minimum viable EOSC in combination with some other horizontal services, in addition to others that will be provided by the communities, whatever the community is, whether it's thematic or regional, national node, and so on. The GEANT position a paper was put together because it seems that everybody needed to put their ideas on a paper to also clarify things to themselves by the NRENs. So who wrote this paper? It was a subset of the NRENs, but however, this is really the position of the GEANT community, which forms also a large proportion of the mandated organizations that are part of EOSC. Why did I feel the need to put this paper together? Well, as I said, partially to clarify the ideas, and it helps if you have a paper to bring everybody together, but also to reflect on the fact that there are existing delivery channels and to stress that the NRENs can play an important role here, partially because they are a mandated organization, partially because they are already involved in the procurement and the deployment of the EOSC EU node, and partially because there are other efforts that are ongoing nationally that should be taken into consideration. The paper puts forward some guiding principle for the delivery of the EOSC nodes, but again, I don't think there is anything rocket science there or particularly controversial, but we will see. There are some main assumptions. One is that EOSC should continue to be a researcher community-centered initiative. So all this should be there in place to facilitate the users, the researchers, to find resources in a seamless way, rather than imposing more rules and more bureaucracy and and complexity. The other assumption is that EOSC should remain in a federated environment, meaning that EOSC should not become yet another infrastructure, but should should take the energy and the strength from existing elements that are there. And there are important aspects that come with that. One is the strength that the federated environment already brings, and that is the trust the member shares. And this is an important aspect. Everybody has got their own views, but there is a lot of trust across infrastructures, clusters, and other type of nodes, so to speak. And it took years to be created, so we should really try and preserve that. Another aspect is the control of how the control happens in a federated environment. Whilst there should be rules so that everybody can play together, at the end, policy should be endorsed and enforced nationally by the various nodes. And Natalia, I think she had something along those lines in her slides. The nodes also should be loosely coupled to the EOSC node, which means there should not be a top-down approach with a master node that rules it all and that everything has to go via that node. And this will allow the creation of this ecosystem that is healthy with all type of different nodes, some of which already exist. The principles are then 6 principles in total. One is about preferring existing delivery models. And I already mentioned this, there is already a lot of infrastructure and service resources that is being delivered, and users are already familiar with that. So that helps if users don't get confused among multiple paths. It's nice to have choices, but too many choices may be confusing. Policy, this is an important aspect and which the EOSC community has to take together. We all agree on the fact there should be rules and policies, best practices, but this should be driven by consensus and should be inclusive rather than exclusive. Again, a top-down approach will not work because there is already existing way of delivering services and operating resources. The nodes should take full advantage of the federating model, and I've already said a lot about that, so I will skip to the next part. The subsidiarity aspect, I think we all can agree that there is really a value to make this nodes model work if everybody can feel responsible and therefore able to control and enforce the policy. And in this way, we can add value for the users. At the end of the day, we are doing all this to make sure that the resources can be more easily shared, more easily findable, and can then benefit the end user at the end. And the funding is another part. I think Tiziana was touching a little bit upon that. The operation of these nodes are complex and require skills, and we have seen that already with the clusters. We have seen that already with the infrastructures, and we will see this in the deployment of the EU node. And they need to be properly resourced via dedicated funding, whether it's a mix of funding, national, regional, or EU. But I think only the project-based approach will not work here, because those will become really infrastructures that are supposed to live beyond the lifetime of the project. And with this is my last slide to conclude. I will not go very much into the diagram because I don't think we have the right set here to discuss the details. But the important part is that the NRENs community is supportive about the model and the concept of the EOSC node, and we believe that they can fulfill the EOSC potential as long as the nodes make it easier to find the resources. I mean, this has been a pattern all along the EOSC projects, the various projects. The user journey has to be simple. A baseline should be, of course, created and agreed to ensure that there is interoperability, and this gives also a good expectation for users. And the governance should be inclusive. And the NRENs as big stakeholders are really willing to engage and participate, and also bring to the table the experience in deploying large-scale cross boundaries federated infrastructures. The network is an example, but EduROM comes also to mind, EduGain, and so on. And with this, I'm done. So, and I will hand it over to you, Tiziana.
So thanks, Licia, for this presentation, and Natalie as well. I understand that there is now a coffee break. So
yes, this is what I want to intervene. Thanks a million for all your talks. We would suppose that we are going now for a short coffee break, and afterwards we are asking the assembly to come to the podium, and we go for some questions from the audience and also from our participants outside, and carry on with our last two speakers of the afternoon. So I would suppose that we see each other in 10 minutes, if possible. Sorry?
Let's do it with 10, it's okay.
I just I start with 10 and we agree that to have 15 minutes, you know. I know, because and this is just a remark from my side. It's I see it very positively, the discussions during the coffee break we're having, because yeah. Thanks from the speakers, and see you in 10 minutes or 15.
Jo, što jūs ausinės.
Hello? Hello? You are muted. I don't know if you are already resuming your session. Hello?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Now we can.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. No, it was just some principal things before we start with our short round of questions for the e-IRG assembly. I want to say, please stay online for those who are outside, because we maybe managed to close our session today within time. And there is one speaker left after our discussion, which is online, I see. And I would suggest to get Tiziana and colleagues in, because they are not on time. I say 10 minutes. No, but it's there's still discussions going on outside here, and we have to stop this because we are a reflection group. There's no time for talking. So give us a minute, then we have everybody. Tiziana. Tiziana, we're waiting for you. And maybe Jos should also be with us.
Yes,
I see him coming.
And Lisa and Natalia are online, right?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
Jos, you come?
Perhaps we can put them in the spotlight so they are visible here.
Because I also want we highly appreciated also the comments on the chat and the participation. And I see a lot of support, Tiziana, by the way, for your presentations, and also in general, the presentations which were held from the assembly. It was rather interesting. This brings me to my first little remark I want to make. You mentioned I think it was in the last presentation, there was the guidelines or the guiding principles of GÉANT were mentioned, and I think this was paired a lot with explanations what services are previously done by various infras, and to be honest, I got the impression that the nodes are still working. Others are talking about the concept of nodes, and here we see a lot of very good examples that these nodes are at a certain level rather productive at the moment and giving services which are pre-existing. A second point which I found rather important was the fact that it was mentioned that a pure project-funded approach is not suitable for the sustainability of all of this, which brings me to my main question. I ask all the time, how can we manage to make it stable? I think this is a big question. Also in connection to the pure scientific approach, to the scientific community. How does this scientific community at the end jump on the train and uses all these services as they are doing this, let's say, of course, in a high proportion at the moment as well.
So my initial input to this question is the following, and is based on the experience the infrastructures and at least EGI have been gathering in running the EGIS project. Research communities are also very aware about sustainability when they outsource some of the assets necessary for their research activities. So the first question is for how long the service will be available. If the availability is too limited in time, that makes the effort of integrating and engaging not worth the investment in terms of people's effort and knowledge in working with you. So the first remark is user communities are extremely aware of the importance of long-term access and the complexity of integrating data and services into their own existing frameworks. So having long-term funding guaranteed is necessary to have the credibility and establish the trust that Licia was mentioning with the scientific user groups. The EGI experience is that national funding for the nodes is centrally based on national funding agencies with their own access policies. In our specific domain, we are not aware of funding available nationally that would be available and accessible to international user groups unless the international user group has a point of presence in the country or is a research infrastructure that is on the national roadmap. So by default, the existing funding models, when it goes to computing, storage, and adding value services around computing, are not available as open infrastructure to scientific user groups. And if we want to make the problem even more complex, if a national node has relevant research data to share for secondary use, but this data cannot be easily downloaded and copied in another lab, then the only way to access this data is on-site, because data has gravity. So moving or recuperating data from archives is a very lengthy process. So this kind of big data can only be processed where the data is hosted, which means either because of these technical constraints or also because of sensitive data which cannot be shared and transferred. The only way to make it available is to process on-site. And if the funding policies at the national level don't allow that for international usage, that hinders the vision of open science. So we see still a disconnect between the vision of open science, the open science policies being pushed by the ministries, but how the funding is being organized nationally. So we hope that in the context of the EOSC initiative, this structural problem, which is not specific to infrastructures, but also relevant to research infrastructures, which are distributed and multi-sited, can be structurally addressed.
Yeah, thank you. I think, Katrin, if you want to say some additional words.
So Licia is not available, so I will go back to your question on the guiding principles, because obviously I'm not a technologist like Licia, so I go where I understand matters, which is, you know, how do you build things in the long term. And when we, over the summer, the GEAN community came together to and we had at least 10 meetings on a Tuesday morning between 9 and 10 to write this paper with a lot of people. And in order to write a community paper, you really need to go back to first principles. And one of the things that was guiding the conversation that we had in the community was the people who have the experience of building federated services. They kept saying, we have 20 years experience. And I kept saying, what does that mean? And because you need to be able to explain your experience. And one of the things is that we wrote also a paper with Klaas Wieringa and Christoph Buchanolopoulos on the history of 20 years of federated identity management in the GEAN community, which came out of this completely unrelated. But the other thing is that we actually put the principles together that we feel are necessary if you want to build something federated that is long time. And of course, as Licia said, you need to then say, okay, we prefer existing delivery models because we are all, so to use just now, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants. We need to use those giants. We need to have community-driven policies because this is for the community, by the community, and it needs to remain or make sense in the science community. We need to take advantage of the federated model that in this community, we all understand, and also the scientific community by nature understands a federated model. And then subsidiarity from our perspective is very important. I mean, in GEANT, we are always aware that we live on the European level and the NRENs are on the national level. And then there's, in many countries, there's regional levels, and then there's the local level. And this subsidiarity needs to be recognized and understood. And this subsidiarity is also where in the end, the sustainability is found. If you make every person responsible for what they deliver in their environment. Look at EduRoam. Every single EduRoam hotspot is financed by somebody here, by the Universidad Politecnica. We all participate, we use EduRoam. Ignacio is not going to introduce and give us an invoice at the end. No, because he knows when his students go to the university in Vienna, they're taken care of there. So this is how the local level, the regional level in a delivery model like EduRoam works, sustainable. And GEANT only takes care of the European node, the European exchange, and making sure that EduRoam works. And that leads then to the principle of adding value to the user. This is decisive. If we deliver something where the scientific community says, yeah, me, that doesn't make any sense. And as Licia says, the funding needs to be there, but the funding needs to be where it's needed. So you cannot overfund something on a European level and underfund it on a national or local level. You really need to make sure that the funding is top down and bottom up. Because in the end, when you come to federation, it depends, your federation is as strong as the many that participate and can participate because they have the means to participate. So the funding is where it's necessary. And around those principal points, we then build this paper, because when you have principal points and you can say, yeah, as a community, we can all agree on that. And then, okay, so what is then the next step for our community? So that's how those principles and the funding hang together.
Tiziana, please.
A quick comment for Catherine. One limitation in the model presented when you go to multidisciplinary science and international usage is that the concept of local user doesn't exist. And it's exactly what you want to overcome, that your local infrastructure, data and services can be opened to enable open science. And this makes recuperation of costs more difficult to justify. Why a university would have to pay to support scientists that come from even different countries.
Yeah, but again, EduRoam is the best example. When we introduced EduRoam in Kenya, the University of Nairobi introduced EduRoam. And at first they were shocked because students from all other universities came to log into, because the University of Nairobi had the best connectivity. So their EduRoam access was actually much more successful than from other local universities. And then the administration realized, actually, that's good for us because more students now come to us. So this works in our favor. And instead of being a downturn for EduRoam in Kenya, that particular case made it happen. So I think over time, these international collaborations work because people are smart and they realize the more opportunities they have, the more attractive is their scientific environment. And yes, maybe it costs more, but the return on investment is higher.
Thank you for the very clear words and explanation. I fully agree with all of your points, especially one which is mentioned. It is always the question of how can we implement all these theoretical efforts, and the solution is still the efforts that come from scientists for scientists. So it's the homemade, the homegrown environment, I think, is essential here. Otherwise, it wouldn't make any sense. And I fully agree with you that we have to think very loudly also on the funding situation, which is not optimal. Let's put it that way. At the moment, we have bad experience with it. but this is something one could change in this European environment. And I think there are a lot of chances also to do so, to optimize this way, also with the upcoming FP10 and other discussions we are having. But nevertheless, we want to state here that it is not solely dependent on the common pot European money. It's also strongly dependent on our regional, our domestic efforts, and how we canalize here our funding systems, our budgets, the budgets of our, and as we are all taxpayers, it's our money. Thank you. Are there any additional questions here in the room or in the chat to be mentioned? Yep. There's one. Please go ahead.
Question.
Just a second. We need a mic. Then everybody can hear you outside as well.
There.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Ron from SURF. The question, looking at the notes and the things we discussed this afternoon, right? It's also that we have to work more closely with commercial parties, which are also including in the notes. Not as a thing that as an NREN or as an infrastructure provider you're typically used with. Is this something that you considered, and how do you look at that? That the commercial world be stepping more into our own world as well?
Thank you for this question. I'm not an expert on this, but the only thing I can say as far as I had experience as a scientist now, working since long for the ministry of a small European country, I got the impression that even the purely scientific and research-based services we are providing now, or those people provide, are connected to commercial services, and they are in a way included in all of this. And I think it's even more important to try not to distinguish between these, because for the scientific world, for the researcher, for the student, it's not a question who is providing all the services and how they are performed from whom. So I think there is a big proportion also still in systems we are using here, and I do not see any reason for excluding commercial services or approaches which are coming from there, with one exception, that it should not be, the architecture should not be, let's say, influenced or guided by big players here. Even if this is problematic because they have a lot of money, and could be much more, let's say, invasive on the implementation issues. So it's a sensitive subject also in terms of how much private funding is necessary to guarantee that public good is still existing.
I have perhaps a comment to offer about this question. There are relevant business models that have been investigated and actually implemented in some data-driven initiatives which see a partnership of public bodies and commercial ones. And one of these is the Copernicus DS. So in the Copernicus DS, there was a problem that Europe wanted to structurally address, which is the access to Copernicus archived data. And in these initiatives, which are actually projects, the European Commission was the funder that guaranteed the cost of hosting the data. However, the commercial cloud providers that were the hosting entities were offering adding value services on top of the data as a paid service. So this is an example of how hybrid cost model can be considered, where some parts of the infrastructure which are a public good can be sustained by public funding, and other parts of cost can be sustained by paid access. So there are relevant examples which are sufficiently close to science that can be considered. And of course, if you have a user community that is not having the budget, then there must be a research performing organization that pays for that.
Oh. Thank you, Catherine.
Sorry.
Okay. No, I think if I may answer, is that I think we should not be afraid of commercial providers. And the 3 lots have already indicated the winners of the 3 lots. They all contain, I think, commercial providers. We use them in order to deliver the EOSC. And also, the idea is that this public-private partnerships, because I think this we may be talking about this one, is I think it has to do with how Bob presented this year's federation. Is what are the rules, and how does the communities, we set our own rules in order to use these commercial services and the commercial providers, and this is very important. And coming from the publication side, for example, we have the bad companies and the good companies. I think it's not bad or good companies. It's about companies who should not provide lock-in solutions. And I think it's up to us to make sure that we do not fall into this trap.
And I would just add that, of course, with the OCA procurement and the infrastructure as a service procurement, we also have, I think, very sound models of how we reach, users in a combination between NRENs and the cloud services providers in the country. And of course, SURF is very engaged in that. A good example of that, yeah.
I totally agree. It was a very important point you've raised, Natalia. Of course, the main question is, no matter who is doing it, that there is not this locking situation where we exclude the scientific community from its own needs and services provided. So if this is kept, I think we really do not have to fear about or worry.
It's not just about fearing, it's about that we must include the commercial providers, because especially with AI coming along, we are seeing that now with the large language models, is that we don't believe at this point in time that the public institutions can support these large language models or the fine-tuning of these models, because it's not in their mission yet, where companies now are going full speed. And in the Open Science Fair, we had an excellent presentation by NASA, that they had NASA and IBM public partnership, very well who's doing what and what are the rules. And I think this is the way we will go from now on. And we should not be, we should just delve into that with our own rules and our own goals, and let them come on board.
Yes, thank you very much. I think we have one more question from Switzerland here.
Question.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Christoph from Switch. I have a question on the business model for those national nodes. And the logic behind is the following. So you have communities that are very well organized from the university all the way up to the EU level. Let's take Elixir Life Science. This is a train that works very well, has been built up over many, many years. So it's logic that there will be an Elixir node at the EU level that sort of aggregates whatever comes out of life sciences. And for other disciplines, you have also, for ESFRI projects, you have also these lines from the university all the way up to the EU level. And then you have everybody else who doesn't have these lines to the EU level, and they are, if I understand correctly, sort of the job of the national node. How can that business model work if those communities have not really organized themselves. This is not just an amazing amount of work and very expensive, but it's also probably you deal with communities that don't even look for that. Has ever anybody thought about business models for national nodes?
I mean, Christoph, I can only answer you with, you know, when we started with EduGain and, you know, having federations, and there were many countries in Europe that did not have their own EduGain federation. And NGIs started to be the home away from home for those who didn't have their own federation until they did. And they did get there because of upskilling, training, and support from other communities. So in my mind, I think as infrastructure providers, we have a responsibility, we have a duty to the science community in that respect, that we need to help them reach the next level. And that can be costly, but I think that for a European research area, this is what we need to do if we want to remain competitive in the future. Let no one behind. So we probably have to invest into that. And I think this is where the EOS conversations actually been really visionary for that open science community conversations nationally. What do we as countries have to do to change our national outlook in order to ensure that the science community reaches the next level, so that the next iteration of scientific research can take place? And clearly, I think as NRENs and as NGIs, we have a responsibility there to help that process along, if there's nobody else in the country better placed to do that.
Yes, Fotis?
Since I won't be delivering the talk on the e-IRG national nodes, I had some slides which are relevant to this topic. So there was a Competitiveness Council conclusions document in 2018, which talks about this federation, and it says that let's say everybody all related stakeholders should get organized so as to prepare them for connection to the EOSC. So this comes already 5 years ago. And of course, you know, the e-IRG papers after that, the national nodes document on the 2019 and the white papers talked about these national organizations. Of course, you know, the ESFRIs and the other research infrastructures have their own paths, as you said, so they have the national nodes already. But for the whatever long tail or the other thematic nodes, I think you know, they need to close the loop with the infrastructures and get organized. So this was one of the topic of the e-IRG papers, and it's also part of the recent policy documents, the ERA policy agenda and the Action 8 on research infrastructures, where there is a point on cooperation between research infrastructures, e-infrastructures, and related stakeholders or something, including through EOSC. So I think this is a point, yeah, which may. So I think countries should be discussing for years now this topic. There are national initiatives on open science or EOSC. They have been discussing this topic. So I think, yeah, they need to deliver. There are different models in the different countries. So it's you know, it's clear that also from the e-IRG white papers, no one size fits all, but there are different models, and probably there should be good practices on different countries, and some countries should follow other countries that are leading with some of the models and so on. So it's ongoing. I think it takes time.
Yeah, thank you for this. I agree with you. Yeah, because I got the impression anyway that when asking the question, is the idea of nodes and the model of nodes, is it something which is completely new, or is it something which has been evolved during time? I would say it's the last one. All these efforts which are behind this now show up that we have gone rather far, I guess, with this federation and the idea of nodes. But this is also, there's a lot of energy still necessary to to bring these things together. For this, another.
Yes, we have one more presentation. We have Giovanni Lamana waiting.
Exactly, and this
So-
therefore I would say we can, if there are no urgent questions now, we can close. And thank you again. Thank you as assembly.
Yeah.
And we can go now to our last speaker, who is online, as I see. Oh, yes.
I don't know if it is me.
Yes, it's you, Giovanni.
I was scheduled 1 hour ago, and then I'm still here anyhow.
Thank you.
So I share the slides. So do you see my presentation? Do you hear me correctly?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, thanks anyhow for the invitation to talk about the science clusters. The title is the one that you see here, long-term commitment to open science, but you want to know a little bit about OSCARs and what is going on these last months and for next year. First of all, a little bit of background to remind you that the ESFRI science clusters were built in 2019 with the specific Age 2020 action, aiming at supporting the open science data intensive research in order to raise the productivity of researchers and to lead to new insight and innovation. It was asked to the community to commit in open science, implementing the fairness of scientific data. And then the scheme was built to connect among them the ESFRI's projects and landmarks and other world-class research infrastructure to start building the European Open Science Cloud. That at that time was just a concept. Therefore, we had 5 clusters that are spanning the different disciplines from environmental and earth sciences to biomedical science, astrophysics, particle nuclear physics, neutron light source facilities, and social science and humanities. Since now 4 or 5 years, we have been also supporting fruitful cooperation, alignment of visions among the 5 clusters. The examples are the first edition of the position statements of the 5 clusters. Then in 2021, a common paper concerning the position statement on expectations of long-term commitment in open science that was also presented in a workshop. And at that time, during the 2021 was the year when we also started to be invited to cooperate into a EOSC Future project in connections also with the 5 pan-European research infrastructures that are presented here in the slides. And this has made possible some cooperation on technical aspects for those communities who are already equipped with expertise in this sense, but from all the 5 clusters, the possibility to support explorative pilot test science projects within EOSC Future that have validated some of the technical core services development. The science clusters are, so I mentioned here just a few statements coming out from our document. Our engines of interdisciplinarity occupy a unique position between EOSC, ESFRI, research infrastructure, and scientific communities. The science cluster is uniquely capable to address the challenges of open research data, being at the same time data producers and consumers, and are key part in developing mid-level multidisciplinary tools and platforms. The science cluster's track record of integrating infrastructure can be a significant asset for the EOSC, as it was said this afternoon. The EOSC Association, majority members are research institutes, universities. The 5 science cluster age 2020 grants are now ended. However, all the 5 have put in place long-term structures through MOU, collaboration agreement. And this was really a momentum, bottom-up, coming from the community, not disparaging the efforts and the cross-fertilization framework that was built after the end of the Age 2020 grants. So we succeeded in that. So you see here the reference to a web page. It is a sort of landing page for the 5 domains, where we look forward to collecting in the future common examples of works, statements, and the outcome of the open calls, science projects, cascading grant. So they have a common position and agree to have effective mechanism to enable cross-cluster, cross-domain collaborations. To participate in the EOSC implementation, I add between brackets by notes, because I understand that this is really the hot topics of your meeting. So I try later to say some considerations about that. But to go further, so the actions that will start now in 2024, the very first one is OSCARs, the Open Science Clusters Action for Research and Society. That is the first attempt of having a cluster of clusters, not as a formal structure, but a formal cooperation, leveraging or building on the science clusters approach and results that in these pictures are listed and colored by categories of results. The budget is limited for the consolidation actions, while most of it is dedicated to cascading grant calls that will be opened twice around March and around November 2024. And we are asked to support projects that will have funding between 100 and 250 kilo euros, and a duration time between a minimum of 1 year and maximum 2 years. As I said, there are 2 objectives or 2 pillars. One is the consolidation into lasting interdisciplinary services and working practices. And the second one is the leading and fostering the involvement of the research community in EOSC by supporting funding open science projects and services. But there are also expected results in terms of the call, and therefore in terms of the grant agreement, increase the open science practice, exploring, structuring, and proposing a model of operation and an economic model for community-based competence centers for the 5 clusters, and further consolidate and then deploy and operate the virtual research environments, the composable open data analysis services. Therefore, you see on the right side as expected outcomes, we'll look forward to operating competence centers, to uptake web-based, highly composable platforms for open science data analysis. We want to succeed, obviously, in involvement, enhancing the involvement of scientific communities in EOSC, and then continues the cross-fertilization among clusters and between clusters. And of course, there is a question also proposing an economy of scale for the cross-clusters or cross-RI services. That's not all. Indeed, there is another project that was inspired and led by the clusters. That is the one called the EVERS, European Virtual Institute for Research Software Excellence, in response to the call number 0102 of 2023. And again, the program is built on the science cluster approach. In particular, we consolidate the effort done on software on twofold, let's say, on the deployment of domain-based catalog of software, as well as in the innovation of software. This was an important part in some clusters like in ESCAPE, but also in EOSC Life. and further was recognized as an important long-term activity for the 5 classes. Therefore, we put in place a project, this one, where we target the development of community-based approaches for ensuring and improving quality of scientific software and code. But on top of this, we commit to deploy finally a vision which was built in the last more than 5 years of having a virtual research institute starting from Europe, but then will become global on research software. So this helps me to remind you that since now some years, we have a sort of work plan, a multi-year work plan with a clear progressing evolutionary path of the cooperation of the 5 classes in stages. And where we put ahead first some general objectives, then we have starting targeted specific objectives, and then will come soon the operational objectives. Therefore, we look forward together in parallel with the agenda of EOSC of a second important destination action of the cluster, where we have to tackle or to commit in the operation of potentially the clusters as entities, or anyhow the services to support the open science. And this is connected also towards the idea of the EOSC EU node, as requested by the organizers of these sections. Therefore, I'm here sharing with you a couple of slides where I try to list some considerations that I'm convinced, after having been listened to you all, that are somehow complementary. First of all, you should not forget, I know that you know this, that there is a clear, important level of diversity, heterogeneity among the 5 clusters, among the scientific communities, for background, capacity, expertise, but also a different way of performing research and data analysis. I try here to highlight for the 5 clusters, 5, let's say, distinct elements that make the diversity, but it is not exhaustive, obviously. First of all, there are research infrastructures that are managing thematic data repositories. This is the case, for instance, in social science, also with national nodes. And in this case, national nodes should coordinate to evolve expertise based on the science domain and participate in a European Union thematic federation. Then you have also research infrastructures managing thematic data repositories and workflows based on widely distributed data sources. This is the case, for instance, of Earth, environmental science. And here, the EU node, now please allow me to refer to EU node, but we can talk about EU node or EU nodes, but anyhow, something which has a European dimension, okay, that we do reference to from the scientific communities, or we do participate to build it. Therefore, I was saying a transversal thematic EU node would be useful to promote data federation and strengthen the community around the same goals. There are domains where data production management are already federated in a community-based data hub as an NRI in itself and a series of national nodes. This is the case, for instance, in life science. And in this case, they are aimed at becoming or being included in a EU thematic EOSC node. Then you have large physics infrastructures operating as multi-domain research facilities that would benefit from the basic services of the infrastructures, the pan-European infrastructures that you represent, and the EU EOSC node services with the core services. They are data producers, promoting a EU league of those physics facilities for data research would reinforce common practices and goals, and that's to be considered in the remit of a EU EOSC node and in the EOSC implementation. And finally, that concerns more, let's say, the big science escape, astrophysics, particle nuclear physics. The big science RIs have all the scientific and technological expertise and are responsible for the production and exploitation of data. They operate observatories and also open access of high-level scientific data from accelerator-based project. In this case, a community-based EU node would operate for to tackle the issues that are important of the sustainability, long-term sustainability of the ESFRIs, for the economies of scales that is important for the participation of different national institutes, and to maintain the RI's commitment to the ESC, but I would say more largely to uptake and maintain the commitment of and the interest of scientists in open science as it is translated by EOSC. Then to conclude, I share with you these considerations. There was the request of considering what's an EOSC EU node. I understand everything, it is clear. I mostly have been inspired by the document, the draft document of the EOSC Association explaining the situation. What I see is that as far as it is presented today with the procurements, you know, the for EOSC core services operation is okay. Is the point A, instrumental for multidisciplinary long tail of science and to foster standardization data stewardship. As a limited scientific scope, if aimed at proposing services as one-fits-all solution. The ownership, I believe, can be moved to national entities, nodes, contracted to operate major services. Now, what I claim is that we have to consider the pillar B. We have to consider that a EU node, an entity for EOSC, should also be in charge, or probably has to consider about the high-level services evolution for open science and excellence research. I believe that the action of managing cascading grant calls in the future, also after OSCAs, will be needed because it is suitable in the long run to promote cross-domain cooperation, the uptake of open science by researchers, the fostering of science priorities for society in the EU framework. And then we need a central role for strengthening, supporting the ESFRI for economy of scaling data management, training, and then developing the science strategy in the EU, supporting the revolution of the data-intensive knowledge and research for science diplomacy, the impact of science on society, linking EOSC also to other sectoral data spaces. I believe this content is also needed to be considered. Management of highly composable virtual research environments per scientific domain for full hosting of open scientific projects and federation of scientists in open research. At the end, this is something that has to be operated, and then it is in continuous evolutions. There is no service static that will be useful for science. Everything is continual evolution. That we need a central model, an economic model, and then a management and operational model, centrally supporting the federation of thematic data with involvement of national institutes is also a role of this potential EOSC node or EU nodes. And finally, should also include somehow at a summary of all these things that have been highlighted and communicating and sharing with you, a cluster of clusters. Because we need to coordinate to make our best effort, but to make solutions, to find solutions together. Each scientific cluster would operate in European thematic node, potentially owned by the EC and managed by the Association of ESFRI cluster members and their consortium of national institutes. But the central role has to be considered. At least in the reflections, we have to also consider this second interpretation, complementary interpretation. I conclude just to give you the message that there is important progress in the cooperation of the 5 classes. We are achieving our goals and milestones according to our program, and that the sustainable long-term goal of each science class is seen as part of the overall EU plan for the implementation of EOSC, including the subject that is discussed today, and the 5 science clusters are working also along this perspective of EOSC EU node or EOSC EU nodes, thematic nodes. Thank you.
Thank you, Giovanni, for your very, very dense presentation of a very complex view. Highly appreciate your views at the end. and your conclusions. Maybe you have seen that János Mohácsi was giving a small comment to you. He says, I would not exclude generic EOSC nodes. Not all EOSC nodes will be formed based on science domains. What do you react here in this case? You're muted, sorry.
Sorry. Yes, upon your kind invitation, I was bringing some complementary consideration and views that, in my opinion, since are targeting science, should be considered, not because are coming from me, but because are related to science, should be considered by the pan-European infrastructure with the high level of attention. But I do agree with János that this is not an exhaustive consideration. Furthermore, there is, as I said, and I think was said also by the previous speakers, we do not have to exclude the link between science and society that is intrinsically related to connected to open science. And this opens up the question of how do we deploy working context and then implementation of the bridges between EOSC and other sectoral data spaces. And therefore, nodes for other data spaces and not for science domains are relevant, as János is saying.
Thank you very much for this explanation. But I have one question from the audience. Panos, please.
Yeah. I see that you have 5 different areas, very different, like social sciences and astrophysics. Obviously, you have a very large number of players, of scientists who have worked in this, probably several hundreds of people. My question is, do you have an idea of how many people outside of the people who have created and used and produced the data and cured the data, outside of that in the community, have been able to use these products that you have made in this work?
Well, first of all, there are different phases, and the phase in which we do enter with Oscars is the lever arm to see if there is the possibility to enhance, and we hope to enhance the interest in open science, because at the end, through these calls, whatever is the discipline, we have to commit to some hosting with the EOSC services produced by the pan-European infrastructures, by the EOSC core services and other the classes. Therefore, we should postpone this kind of evaluation during the next couple of years. Potentially, anyhow, in some cases, I can give you a couple of examples without entering details shortly. You can have, like in a life science, where you have platforms, hub, where the ESFRIs or the ERICs are already a hub or platforms with managing data, like the bioimaging data. So here, the number of users is known, is the community, and therefore, whatever we do with the clusters is to improve the capacity of providing data and workflows. Therefore, the potential and the real numbers is already consequent, is already important. On the opposite, if we consider escape in astrophysics and particle physics, there is a core related to astrophysics that relies on already existing fair, open access astronomical data that are of usage of the full community. We are just bringing these infrastructures in the EOSC context and responding to the challenges of the next generation of ESFRIs. The other next generation ESFRIs that are big science projects that demand a lot of time to be deployed are going to go in operation with the real data coming in the next years. And at that time, EOSC will be an opportunity to support the new paradigm of providing data through these new observatories, new facilities, and the users will be the full communities, because the observatory will work as an open facility.
Thank you, Giovanni. I think this answers a lot of questions and brings me also to one comment. We know about these institutions. There's, for example, one big infrastructure comes into my mind is ESO. When you look at how ESO ESO's policy is about the management of data and the openness of data, you see it as a very good and prominent example of living open science principle can work and can be included into the whole idea.
Although it's an international organization, ESO is one of the projects that is partly in ESCAPE and also in the current ESCAPE collaboration. And through the ESCAPE work program was, as you said, because you know the situation, is particularly sensible to connect the virtual observatory standards and services deployed also through the ESO archives with the data lake and the service of ESCAPE to face the next generation projects. And then, Stefan, don't forget that CTA or observatory will be co-operated by ESO, who will be in charge of the southern side of the CTA observatory. So you see, same partner for the cluster are really in scope of what the countries are expected and what these institutions are expecting.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I'm looking into the audience. I see no raised hands at the moment. I think on the chat, I cannot see any further questions at the moment. When looking at the watch, I have to apologize for those who have to wait till now to be here on the floor and talk with us. I think this was our last presentation, which means we are at the end of our session here. End of the third session means the workshop is coming to an end. It was a pleasure to have you all here. I do not want to sum up all of our insights we got here because it would be too much. As I said before, there will be a communique transported also online. You will have the possibility to read and to give inputs as well from there. And I also want to emphasize you to, if you want to raise a hand or say a word, please send it to the secretary, send it to us. We will include it into our communique. And it was again a pleasure to meet you here. Thanks to the Spanish presidency, we were able to come to Valencia, which is a much more comfortable city at the moment when I compare it to all the rest of the Central European countries, which are having much lower temperatures and bad weather and real winter situation. So it was really good experience to be here. Thanks for hospitality and yeah, we are facing to another presidency at the moment. This brings me to the point. Belgium is next. We're looking forward to meet each other in Belgium. And see what has been produced in between this time. I think we're going one step after the other. I take home a lot of good comments and discussion points for further discussions with policymakers, stakeholders in the role of e-IRG together with the scientific community. And thanks again for participation and all the inputs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So if you allow me just a final closing. So I want to thank everybody, I mean, all the speakers for the very good presentation. I think I really enjoyed the presentations. So they were very, very deep and insight. All the attendants and with the questions on remote and presence, the Secretariat project that they help a lot, and also the program committee on setting up this complex agenda, plenty of things, Stefan especially also for sharing all this event. And finally, my staff that they have really worked very hard, Carlos for all the audiovisuals, Conrado for all the logistics, Damian and the rest, Estivalit and Amanda that was yesterday here helping me on all these things. So thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. I'm very pleased to have you.
Just two comments from my side also. The next ERG workshop will take place in the first week of June. So the Belgian presidency events will be organized from the 4th to the 7th of June. On the 4th and 5th, there will be the Research Infrastructures Conference organized by the presidency. So this ends on Wednesday, the 5th of June, and then the ERG workshop will start. So in the afternoon of the 5th and the whole day of the 6th, and the ERG meeting will take place on June the 7th. So this will be announced probably by Chris tomorrow at the ERG meeting. And the other point is for the speakers, if you want some concrete messages to be included in the communique, please send us some short quotes, 1-2 sentences. It will be a short 2-pager, so please send us your inputs. So thank you very much also from our side. And thanks a lot to Ignacio for hosting us and doing this fantastic job. Okay.
Oh, it's here? Yes.